Let's go to our MS Now reporters at a couple of those key primaries today. Kevin Fry is at a polling station in Bangor, Maine. Will McDuffie is a few miles outside Greenville, South Carolina. And also with us, director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School, MS Now political contributor John Della Volpe, and New York Times chief White House correspondent and MS Now political analyst Peter Baker. Kevin, what is Plattner's closing message to Democratic voters, and what are you hearing about why people are supporting him?
Yeah, and some of those voters are now getting a chance to have their voices heard. Just behind me, we're in basically the Civic Center here in Bangor, where voters have to come to cast their ballots. And you can see the voting booths right behind me. They're putting their ballots through the machines and making their voices heard. Now, Plattner's message in the closing days of this campaign has been one of trying to pivot away of the kind of scandal-plagued stories that have popped up in the last week and a half about his personal life, and trying to pivot back to the economics, the populist, the taking on the billionaires, taking on the establishment sort of message that his campaign hopes is able to resonate here as he seeks to take on Susan Collins in November. That's not to say, though, that there aren't some voters, even if they say they're backing Plattner, that have told us that they do have some trepidations, that they wish they wouldn't mind if they had a candidate without perhaps so much baggage. Here's some of what we've heard.
There have been some things that have come out that have disappointed me a little bit about Graham Plattner. However, I still think he's the best candidate.
I would not like Ms. Concerned to be reelected. So I'd like to vote for a Democrat that I think can win.
And do you think Plattner can win?
Yeah, I do. I'd like to think we could get someone that doesn't have as much baggage as Plattner.
Is there anything that could come out against him that would make you think, okay, I guess I'll have to vote for Collins instead?
No, I don't. I think I would rather just not vote.
And so that's one of the perhaps most key things we've heard in the last few days, which is, as we've been trying to get some senses, if is there a line that people are willing to cross, or is there a line where they say, you know what, no more, I can't back him? What would they do in November if there is another shoe that drops, hypothetically, about Plattner, who, of course, is a newbie on the political scene? We're kind of watching the vetting process play out in real time. And we will see if there are other folks like that woman we just heard from who say, you know what, I'd rather just stay on the couch, or I'll just leave that line blank. I don't like Collins, but maybe I'm not fully comfortable. That's one of the dynamics that voters themselves are grappling with right now, though largely the folks that we're hearing from are willing to accept a degree of forgiveness, are willing to accept this idea of a rehabilitation sort of arc, saying that Plattner made mistakes, but we like the message and we like what he's fighting for.
And yet there's a damning new op-ed just today out by Plattner's former political director, Genevieve McDonald. Now, she resigned in October, saying she was disturbed by what she learned about Plattner. And some of her key quotes here: Graham Plattner is not someone who would be good for Maine or for the country. He exhibits a pattern of dishonest behavior. Over the past 8 months, women have come to me with their own disturbing stories about Plattner. MS Now has reached out to the Plattner campaign for response. John, Plattner has to counter these controversies and change people's minds about Susan Collins, a known quantity to voters there. How hard will that be?
Well, clearly, I think Graham Plattner, I think Democrats in Washington, D.C. prefer to have this race be about Susan Collins, but that's not where we are. But Anna, watching that reporting, I'm old enough to remember 2016. I'm old enough to remember, we all are, I think, the interviews of similar kinds of voters across battleground states, except the question wasn't about people's concerns about Plattner's personal background, but it was about Donald Trump's background. Mm-hmm. And there are millions of voters, I think, who made the decision in 2020 and 2024 that despite being uneasy with where Donald Trump was, they thought his particular policies would be better for themselves and for the country. And I think the exact same thing right now is playing out in Maine. I think Donald Trump prepared Mainers and perhaps all of us for this kind of campaign. But what makes Graham Plattner so unique, I think, isn't his ideology. It is this unique combination of his independence, of his authenticity, and his empathy to connect directly with Maine voters. And if he can continue to talk about their experience and how a Democratic senator and Democratic Senate can improve their lives, that will be, I think, the winning message in November.
He is certainly connected with voters there, all but knocking out Janet Mills, the sitting governor who launched this Senate campaign, has since suspended that campaign because she just didn't get the traction to continue to fund it, even though she does remain on the ballot. But Peter, what do Democrats see as Plattner's strongest case against Susan Collins? What's her biggest vulnerability?
Well, Donald Trump, obviously. That's what it's all about. I mean, she has been an enabler, as far as a lot of Democrats are concerned, of Donald Trump, and Mainers are not Donald Trump supporters. I think that they're going to wrap that around her neck. And the Democratic strategy is going to be, as John said, it's going to be about party over individual, right? Yeah, you might not like this guy. He may not be, have the character that you think the senator ought to have, but he's part of the party that you agree with, and therefore you need to vote for him. And I think that's really a remarkable indication of how much our politics have evolved over this last decade, where people are so determined to be for or against Trump, to be for or against their party, that it really doesn't matter too much, or they're willing to put aside concerns about the character and the record of their own candidate, as long as their candidate has a D or an R next to their name.
Will, let's bring you in from South Carolina, a wide open primary for governor in that state, and another MAGA falling out. This time it was Nancy Mace and Donald Trump, and she's running for governor. What's the state of play?
Well, Anna, it's another test of a Trump endorsement in a Republican primary. Now, we're used to his endorsees becoming Teflon, but just last week we saw his pick for Iowa governor lose in the primary there. And Pamela Evette, the lieutenant governor here, who Trump endorsed a few days ago, is no sure thing either. She's in a very crowded race with several others polling in the double digits, according to recent surveys. And look, we're in a Greenville suburb that went nearly 3-1 for Donald Trump in 2024. Every Republican voter we spoke to this morning supports the president, but it doesn't mean they're on board with Evette. Take a listen.
I voted for Ralph Norman. He's been a good guy, conservative, always behind the values and principles of the Republican Party, and I just trust his judgment more than the other candidates.
Are you a Trump guy?
I am, yeah.
He endorsed the lieutenant governor.
I really have no clue why Trump would endorse Pamela Evette.
So the Trump endorsement alone is not enough for you to get on board?
No, I don't think so.
And Anna, if that Trump endorsement hurts anyone in this race the most, it might be Representative Nancy Mace, who styles herself as a MAGA firebrand, but she might have lost the president's support when she voted to release the Epstein files last year. But look, in any case, we're unlikely to get a clear winner tonight because with such a crowded field, it's unlikely any of these candidates hits 50%, which means we're looking at a runoff in just a couple weeks. Anna?
Will McDuffie in South Carolina for us. Thanks for laying out the state's races there. Peter, Mace still highlights past Trump support on her website. But I think about how that same strategy to try to still kind of cozy up to Trump failed for Republicans like John Cornyn, who also didn't get Trump's backing in his primary. Why not try a new approach?
Yeah, because there hasn't been a new approach that's worked. I mean, look, John Cornyn, of course, was not really seen as a Trumper, at least not compared to Ken Paxton. Nancy Mace has been, in effect, cast to the sidewalk by Trump, and people know that. She offended him by pushing on the Epstein files. She's been very outspoken on the issue of sexual assault. It's been an important issue for her. And I think that left her sort of as a party of one. And in this Republican Party, if you're not on the Trump train, then, the path to success is just that much steeper. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the fall, by the way. I mean, I think what's important to remember is that all these Trump-backed candidates may be looking strong in Republican primaries, but they then have to meet a general electorate. And what we've seen in the year and a half since the president took office again is that the general electorate has moved significantly to the left. In every off-year election, every special election in which Democrats have faced Republicans, the Democratic vote has moved significantly, up versus the Republicans. That I mean that they win every district, but they have gotten more votes than they did last time around. And so I think that's the conundrum for Republicans. You have to tack toward Trump in the primaries, but then you have to worry about a general electorate in many of these states and districts in the fall.
I mean, just looking at South Carolina, Trump carried that state in 3 presidential elections with at least 55% of the vote. John, do Democrats fear a Trump-backed candidate in a general, or do they see it as an advantage now with a majority of the country opposed to the Iran war and prices skyrocketing for millions?
Well, obviously, South Carolina is a deep red state. But when you pull back the lens here, when you look at the 50 states plus Washington, D.C., Donald Trump is underwater in 46 of those 51 states. It is only Idaho, North Dakota, Wyoming, and West Virginia where Donald Trump has a positive approval rating. He is like twice as unpopular today as he was in his first term. His first term at this moment, he was -10 in terms of his approval rating, according to YouGov. Joe Biden was -10. At this point, Donald Trump is -25 points kind of underwater. So it's clearly kind of a drag. He is almost 50 points underwater when it comes to the number one issue in America today, which is inflation and the cost of living. And in every single household across America, that's what voters, I think, are considering as they make their choice in the fall.